Ah, look what I seem to have done to myself. Seem to have stained my shirt. Typical Aussie problem, hey? Tomato sauce down the front of your shirt on after breakfast. Probably should have gone at it a bit easier. Maybe I need someone to come along from one of those 80s fabric cleaner ads, that'll just magically wave their hand and make it disappear. Or maybe Mrs. Marsh needs to come along and give me a hand. This stain makes me think about St. Jimmy's letter in chapter 2. Our chapter divisions in the Bible are helpful to find stuff, but unhelpful because sometimes they chop in half an idea or a train of thought. St. Jimmy says that true religion is to care for orphans and widows and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So what does being stained by the Roman Empire, by the surrounding culture, look like so that effectively you're no different from them? In their context back in the day, it looked like favouring the rich over the poor at church services, making the wealthy comfortable while ordering the homeless about like lackeys. When you do that, you are Antichrist. St. Jimmy was blunt. You have dishonoured the poor. Is it not the rich who oppress you? Is it not they who drag you into court? Is it not they who blaspheme the excellent name that was invoked over you? It's a bit grumpy. St. Jimmy remembered growing up dirt poor, remembered the stories of his older brother being born in a cattle shed, remembered the stories of his mum and dad and their time as asylum seekers in Egypt, remembered their dirt poor days in Nazareth. If his older brother, the Saviour of the world, had left all glory and majesty and wealth and power as the sovereign ruler of the universe to become a human being and live a life like that as the working poor, church ain't got no business bowing down to the suit and tie set or trying to be like them. Privileging the wealthy and powerful over the poor is the rule of the Roman Empire. Wanting to get rich or die trying is the rule of the Roman Empire. The Empire of God offers an alternate reality shaped by the life of Jesus. A reality where the poor boast in being lifted up, as he says in chapter 1, and the rich boast in being brought low because they come to realize how temporary their riches on earth are. The royal decree of God's empire is to love your neighbour as yourself. If you start playing favourites, you'll reap what you sow, and it will destroy you. So in order to live into the royal decree of God's empire, don't let your love for the poor be a nice warm feeling in your heart or some useless platitudes you say to people to make you feel better about the situation. Your love must take action. Your love and your faith must take action. St. Jimmy was concerned that the churches were becoming the rich, becoming the very people who had made their lives hard in many different ways, but including dragging them through court. The church in every generation must beware that we don't become like the people who oppress the church and oppress the society around us. Christians must beware in their personal lives. Now as then, the legal system is hopelessly geared in favour of the rich. The rich can afford the best lawyers. They can afford to take all the time off work they need. They can afford to be away from home at court as much as they need to be to get their way. The poor, well, sometimes they try and represent themselves, but they can't afford much, so they are denied justice. There are many examples we could cite from the news in just the last few weeks, let alone the last few years. Think about the JobKeeper scheme and how it has basically been welfare for the rich. Many companies and organisations turned incredible profits despite the lockdowns last year. And they still got to keep their JobKeeper handouts, and the government says, oh, they don't have to pay it back, whatever. Those handouts were paid for by the taxes of the lowest paid people in this country. For instance, think about Harvey Norman, how they reluctantly handed back a measly $6 million of JobKeeper, but only after massive public pressure. And then you think about the stink that was around Girton College recently in the news in Bendigo, who made millions of dollars in profit last year, and they've got no interest in handing back their JobKeeper handouts. On the other hand, Scott Morrison and Christian Porter hounded the poor to homelessness, destitution and suicide through the robo-debt scheme. They were going to make them pay back every last dollar for a perceived overpayment of welfare. Those two guys still have their wealth and their positions. The rich are laughing all the way to the bank, and the poor are emotionally scarred, destitute, homeless, or dead. The world is deeply stained by favoritism. What about this from the news just yesterday from the Australian Associated Press? Meanwhile, Premier Daniel Andrews is hatching plans to give vaccinated Victorians more freedoms and lock out others refusing to get the jab from venues such as sports stadiums, cinemas and pubs. Discussions are underway with industry, in other words the rich people, to see how the vaccinated economy would work. Mr. Andrews confirmed with the required technology set to be trialled in regional Victoria after it exits lockdown. Wow, a crunch is coming in this state over a felt need to create two parallel worlds, one for the vaccinated and one for the unvaccinated. But the leaders of Teen St Albans before me obviously knew the letter of James and took it to heart. When the no jab, no play line came from the majority of playgroups in the land, they decided not to go down that path, but to show hospitality to everyone who would come. They decided they'd show no favouritism. Well done. Our Premier is going to try and create a fresh division in humanity right here in regional Victoria by creating two classes of citizens. There'll be the vaccinated, who can do whatever they want and go wherever they want, and the unvaccinated, whose freedoms will be curtailed and their lives made onerous and unnecessarily difficult. And in time, the unvaccinated, if this goes on, will become a new class of poor. The world, my friends, is deeply stained to its heart by favoritism. Yet there are so many good news stories out there too, friends. We were talking with our mate Corinne from the Salvos last night, and as we talked about the winter night shelter, she remarked about how this city is so tender-hearted towards the homeless through their enormous monetary and practical support and goodwill shown towards that project. The royal law of Jesus in action in this city. Over the last couple of weeks, you'll know that I've been privileged to be a part of GV Cares as they've delivered hundreds, thousands of food parcels to houses across this city. Hundreds of volunteers champing at the bit to take action. We've dropped those food parcels to homes of meagre means, to homeless people in car parks, and to some pretty well-to-do places. And that brought joy to my spirit because there was no partiality. The royal law of Jesus in action in this city, folks, to love your neighbour as yourself. The empire of God breaking right out on our doorstep. Also want to say to you, Team St Albans, that I'm very proud of you because I've seen you properly make welcome every person that comes into our midst at one of our gatherings. You know, you make conversation with them, you show them care and attention, no matter their appearance. The world is deeply stained by favoritism. Jesus often offers us an alternate reality, the economy of God, the empire of God, a world where there is no favoritism or partiality based on your bank balance or your appearance or your status. The law of the Roman Empire is that wealth and power are supreme. The law of the empire of God is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. So how are we going to remove the stain that runs so large and deep? I reckon the mercy of Jesus, the mercy that triumphs over judgment, might budge that stain.